Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with the most controversial rabbi in the world. Hey, you just got a promotion. Not in the world, but we're going to call it in the Tanakh Talk world. So welcome back, Rabbi. Thank you for taking on these difficult tasks. Things that a lot of rabbis would not like to do in this format, and you're doing a very thorough job. I'll say that for sure. And so glad you're here with us again, and thank you all for tuning in. I'm hoping everybody is everything looks normal in YouTube land. I'm going to verify that just for a second here. Very good, Chad Corliss. Welcome. All right, he says shalom all. Let's go. I totally agree. All right, so here we go. So outrageous claims against the non-Jew in the Talmud. I have heard personally some really just mean, like hazing, really bullying type comments. Now I heard all this stuff while I was still Christian, of course. And actually, I didn't even hear it when I was Christian. I heard it when I was Messianic, and that's something that you all have to watch out for when dealing with Messianic people. They tend to be the ones who shed the most negative light on the oral law. I've heard a little bit from the Christians, but most Christians I've ever met don't really know much about the oral law. It's usually when they switch over to the Hebrew roots, and they really want to take the authority away from the rabbis and give it to their, I would call self-appointed rabbis. And I could say that because was related to one who was self-appointed rabbi, proven self-appointed, by the way, for over 25 years in the Austin, Texas area. It just happens, you know. So, and everything I ever did, Rabbi, this is something you never knew. So my business, when I had my construction business several years ago, I named it 613 Construction, you know, for 613 laws. You know, it was kind of a cool thing. First thing my dad said, who was again this Messianic Jewish. Messianic Christian leader in the Austin area, he said, you really should name it that. I said, why? He goes, because that's based on mythological numbers that they made up just to come up with those numbers. It's all in the oral law. And I never said this to him, but I thought it was interesting that he's a Messianic leader, and he really criticizes the oral law, yet he wears, you know, the talit, and he wears a kippah, you know, and they light the Shabbat candles. None of that is found in Torah, you know, and so he's doing the oral law while criticizing me for keeping the oral law. So the point is, you know, it's really interesting to see the viewpoints of more than anything else from Messianics, because they really tend to try to usurp the authority over the Jews, thinking that they actually have the right answers, and of course you, Rabbi, are blind. Sorry. So, with all that said, I'm gonna turn this over to you and let you go with this outrageous claims against non-Jews. And guys, as you're seeing things, as you're watching these shows regarding the oral law, and if you have any specific topics that you've heard, I can think of probably right off the top of my head about a half a dozen, and we're going to cover those. Specific ones that are really just horrific claims against the oral law. How could that so disgusting, and whatever the case may be. Send that to me in a topic conversation in an email to tanakhtalkquestions@gmail.com, and I'll push those through, and we'll see if we can come up with a show on that for you. So that being said, Rabbi, I'm going to pass it along to you. Thank you again for joining us. Appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge on this space, and we will let you have it. The floor is yours.
All right, pleasure. Always a pleasure to be here. One thing, you know, you mentioned about oral law. We did a bunch of shows about oral law. You know, one of the funny things is people claim, oh, we don't listen to rabbis. We have nothing to do with the rabbis, and what they do essentially is pick and choose. Because the obvious proof against that is if you have a King James version, right? You have a translation. Where does the translation come from? Because everybody knows. Well, if you don't know, you'll find out now. And everybody knows that if you read a Sefer Torah, right, you look at a Torah scroll, it's got no vowels, right? So who put in the vowels? The rabbis put in the vowels. Now, if the rabbis didn't put in the vowels, no non-Jew would ever be able to read, or no Jew for that matter. How would we know what the words say? Right? We would have absolutely no idea. You know, when the Torah says you're not allowed to cook a calf in its mother's chet lamed beis, right? It's either chelet in fat, or in chalav, right? In milk. So how do I know? If you say it's not, you're not allowed to cook a mother and it's, cook a calf in its mother's fat, well, you can't eat anything that's made, that's fatty over here, right? That would
Hey,
take away, most of our diet.
on that
So to
same
speak.
point, can you comment
Yeah.
real quickly on in the in the law where it says you shall circumcise the foreskin of your flesh? The word used there, there's like at least 4 different possible body parts that could have been referring to. Am I right? I think that's what it's called. The word for foreskin or whatever.
It could mean a number of
It
different
could be
things,
like your earlobe
right?
or the skin of your elbow, or so. I
It
mean,
could be,
without
yeah.
having.
Listen, when it says the skin of your flesh, it could be like, my unibrow. Could be over here. It could be inside your ear. Nobody knows,
I mean the
right? Nobody would
actual.
know.
I mean the actual word used for foreskin. I think it was foreskin. I used to remember,
The
but
word is mila, right? That's the word. It's called bris mila. The cutting, literally, I guess the cutting or the covenant of the, of the foreskin itself. Could it have other, could it have other meanings? Could, right? It could in theory. I don't know what all the potential translations are, but the reality is there's so many. It's not even with circumcision.
or
So many
law.
different things. The Torah tells me, I have to sit in a sukkah, right? I have to keep the holiday of Sukkot, Book of Leviticus chapter 24, and I have to sit in the sukkah for 7 days. Well, what exactly is a sukkah, right?
By the
Some
way,
people,
Rabbi, that word I was looking for was orla.
Orla. Yeah,
Yeah,
orla
orla.
could
It's
be,
got like
it could
3
have a
or
lot of
4.
different definitions. Orla
Yeah,
means also forbidden fruit,
there you go.
right?
Cool.
A fruit that you can't eat after from within the first 3 years.
Thank you. I won't
Or in other
interrupt you
words,
anymore.
something like that. It could mean that. It could mean I don't know. It could be. I have other definitions also, right? Being circumcised doesn't necessarily mean something physical either, right? There's also the Torah says having an uncircumcised heart. What's an uncircumcised heart? Obviously, there's a blemish, right? There's a blemish. There's a barrier, right, between you and God. So uses that terminology. So it could be something obviously that is we understand when that everyone would agree, even though that I should say everyone, there's a disagreement between the doctors every so many years whether it's good to take it off the foreskin, not take it off. It's good against cancer. It's not good against cancer. But everyone agrees there's an obligation to take it off. It shouldn't be there. So there are many things, many things, mentioned by a sukkah that Torah says take a nice smelling fruit on sukkahs. No one is ever going to think it's a lemon on steroids, right? It's a citron. It's an esrog, right? Many things. I mean, I could go here till tomorrow, but my name's not Singer, so you won't do it. But I could go here till tomorrow giving examples, in the Torah itself that require explanation. Give one other explanation. One other thing. The Torah says I have to put totafot on me. What are totafot? The Torah tells me, or the translation normally is frontlets between my eyes. Now we understand that to be tefillin. Now the problem is totafot's not even a Hebrew word. It's a hybrid of an African word. So many things I would never understand if I didn't have oral law. But the Messianics and others say, oh, it's only the rabbis. Why do I have to listen to the rabbis? So I would agree. If you tell me I never listen to the rabbis, and I don't pick and choose, that's fine. But I've had people, I had finally someone months after dogging me, trolling me, and this and that, what the rabbis this, the rabbis that, and the rabbis the other thing. Finally they had to admit that they pick and choose. And the knockout blow, or what we would say, checkmate, was the fact that, we're going to read the book of Ruth, the next couple days for the holiday of Shavuos. And Ruth, as everybody knows, is a Moabite, right? Daughter of the king of Moab, granddaughter, a question of the genealogy. Regardless, it says that Torah says a Moabite is never allowed to enter the congregation of the Jewish people. Now, what is it? Now, what about a convert? If someone converts, they should be allowed to enter in, right? Comes comes the Torah, says a Moabite's never allowed to enter into the Jewish people. If a Moabite's never allowed to enter the Jewish people, what do you do? What do you do with Ruth? Right? How is she allowed to convert? You got 3 generations. The end of the book of Ruth, that goes to who? That goes to King David. Now, King David, obviously, the future Jewish Messiah has to come from that line. Has to come from the Davidic line. For the Christians, also pretty crucial. Right, I would say it's pretty crucial, even though the Gospels have different opinions how exactly to go back to King David and the names change and all that. But for them, it's pretty crucial. But if you don't have a Davidic line and Ruth isn't Jewish, it's over, right? As we'd say in Boston, it's over. So what do they answer to that? Now, if I didn't have Jewish law, if I didn't have oral law, then now I got a good claim. Right? I guess I got a good claim over here. What would be the answer? Now, obviously, I know what the answer is because we do have oral law. 100% we have oral law. If we didn't have oral law, I don't have an answer. Not, someone would have to come up with something very clever according to the Torah, according to the prophets, according to somebody, right? According to somebody, and they're going to have to come up with some answer, right? What is going to be the answer, right? Right. So now someone mentions very interesting. Okay. So you have the foreskin. What's the purpose of it? The purpose is to take it off. That's the purpose. It has no other purpose, right? Seemingly it has no other purpose. Why would God make such a command, right? Why would he make such a command? So, there are many times you had people, for instance, that had difficulty in learning, difficulty with Judaism, different things. And one of the first questions that was asked is this person circumcised? You're going to say, oh, so what's the big deal? What does it do? What does the foreskin do? Makes a barrier. There was a story, someone brilliant in the secular world, absolutely brilliant. It came to Torah, came to learning, didn't go. Totally didn't go. And, tried this, they tried that, tried other systems, and, sitting and learning, not so easy. I don't want to, necessarily digress over here, but the point is someone finally, realized, well, maybe this person didn't have bris milah. Maybe they didn't have circumcision. So they checked that and that was the case. That 100% was the case. And then once that happened, once it was taken off, that's a whole different thing, right? Things started to move in a different direction. So we see there is some sort of barrier, some sort of barrier that's there. Someone could say, well, I know people that were uncircumcised Jews, they could also learn in this and that. Okay, so I don't have any, we could bring out all kinds of questions that maybe, there's an exception. There's a potential exception to the rule. Okay, but we're not going to say, well, it's 1 in 1,000, it's 1 in 10,000, right? Someone would just throw this out there. So there was during the Gulf War, 39 Scud missiles, hit Israel, right? And none of them hit direct, hit anything direct, right? So you're talking about 15, 20, 100 kilometers. These things supposed to be absolutely accurate. So what happened? Right, so so either you have the stupidest people shooting them, right, or something else is going on. But what are the odds? 39 missiles that don't hit anything. So somebody says, "Well, I can figure that out." Takes out his calculator, right? Starts pushing some buttons and says, "Oh, look, the odds could be like this." Like, okay, let's say it's 100, 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million, 1 in 50 million, 1 in a trillion. You're gonna play those odds? You're never, I'd be a rich man to say, what, that's going to happen every single time. The odds are about zero, right? They're very slim over here, right? So obviously you need oral law. Without oral law, we wouldn't understand how to do anything. We wouldn't understand any of the mitzvahs, nothing, right? So now one thing to keep in mind when we're going to use all these different examples, going to use a number of different examples. One thing people are going to say, or potentially say, is, come on, you really think that's the answer? That doesn't make sense, and that's just apologetics, and all that. Now, I had somebody once say, someone gave one of my kids a gift, gave them a sweater, and the sweater says, on the thing it says it's 100% wool. Now, it's 100% wool. There could be some flax in there, whatever. So you can't wear, linen, might be linen in there. So the Torah says, I can't wear shatnez. What is shatnez? It's a mixture of wool and linen. So the person, so I said, I have to get it checked. It's probably not a problem, but, I have to get it checked. So the person said, well, why is that? Why isn't a Jew allowed to wear clothing that's a mixture of wool and linen? I said, I don't know. It's a good question. 100% it's a good question. So we hold it's a chok. What is a chok? It's a law that does not make any rational sense, right? Which probably most of the Torah, right? Eating milk and milk, meat and milk, also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The paraduma, the red heifer, that you take the ashes, the Kohen makes someone pure who was impure, and he himself becomes impure. There are things we don't understand that don't make any sense. So this person came back to me and said, well, if you don't have an answer, why would I have to keep it? So I said, okay, let's say I come up with an answer. What could you say? You could say, well, I don't like that answer. This answer doesn't resonate. So I give you another answer. No, I don't like this. I don't like that. People can say all kinds of things, and make it up as they go along and say, come on, you really think that's the answer? Well, one thing we know is that when the rabbis gave an answer for something, or they gave a reason, it did not mean that it was the reason. Doesn't mean that, right? There could be 150,000 different reasons. They didn't have to give all the reasons. 100% they didn't have to give the reasons, right? But they're giving some reasons. Is that the reason? No. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the reason. But again, people could say, come on, let's be real. My dead grandmother could have given a better answer than that. You really think that's the answer? Right? So one thing we have to keep in mind, and we're going to go through a number of cases, right? One thing we have to keep in mind in all these things is that you have to look at things in context. If you take it out of context, which a lot of people do, it's what they call cherry picking. They're going to have a whole, we did this a while ago. There's a whole laundry list of things, of claims that people make. And they, it's a good list. I'm not going to say not. It's a very interesting list of statements that are made that sound absolutely horrific. Sound things against women, sound things, against non-Jews, many, many different things. But a lot of it has to do with, okay, what is the context? What in the world is going on? There could be a whole discussion. About something. And then in the end, it throws out a statement, but that's not really the point of the whole argument. In other words, you go on for a page, half a page, 3/4 of a page, whatever it is. You go through all these different things, and then the end, what does the Talmud say? Talmud gives me something, and tells me something, right? Totally, I'm not going to say that has nothing to do with what's going on, right? But it's coming in, it's not the main part over here, right? So people say, oh, look, the Torah says, just give one example. I think we'll speak about this next week, all right? But the Talmud says you can't save a non-Jew on Shabbos if he's drowning, right? If he's drowning, you can't save, oh, look what the Torah says, look what the Talmud says, terrible things against non-Jews, and if they're drowning, you can't save them. But if you look at what the Talmud says, that's not even the point. That's not even the point at all. The point is, how am I allowed to save a Jew on Shabbos? Right? If he's going to desecrate Shabbos, he doesn't keep Shabbos. The whole point of saving him would be to keep future Sabbaths, right? To keep the, future Shabbos. So if that's the case, it's not holding by Torah mitzvahs, technically, why should I save him? Now, in the end, there is an obligation to save him, right? That's what the halacha is. You have to save him anyway. But the point of the Talmud is not to say, why can't I save a non-Jew? The question of the Talmud is, how am I allowed to save the Jew? That's the question. So someone's going to cherry pick and say, see, look what the Talmud over here says. Look what's going on. This is terrible discrimination. But that's not even the point, right? You get 75 lines, and you're taking out one line out of 75. And you're looking at the end thing when you miss the whole boat. Right? Why is that fair? Why is that fair? Of course it's not fair, but that's what people do. So 100%, a person's going to have to look at things. They're going to have to look at things. They have to look at things in context. But if you don't look at it in context, right? So you're going to say, oh, come on. This is what it says. So we'll go into detail, right? We'll name a number of cases. But again, you have to see what it says. You have to see why it says it. And then you can say, oh, people can always say, come on, I don't like that explanation. Not a question whether you like it or whether you don't like it. They're giving possible answers. They're not saying it's the answer. Could be other answers. Could be 100 answers. Could be 1,000, different answers. But 100%, it's all in context. And when a person takes it out of context and they say, wow, come on, I can't believe they would say this. Or I can't believe they would. Okay, it's a question of perspective, as well. There are many things, right? Many things. So we'll just start Sanhedrin 57a. Talmud makes a statement that a non-Jew that kills a non-Jew or a Jew, 100% they're going to be liable, right? If it's premeditated, 100%, right? That's called murder. That would be forbidden. Now, a Jew is liable, the Talmud says, if he only kills a Jew, not by a non-Jew. Now you're going to say, what? It's permissible to kill a non-Jew? We're saying if it happened. We're not saying we're going out and sitting there systematically just gunning non-Jews down and say, see, the Talmud says it's okay. So the Talmud says it's okay. I can kill a non-Jew like anything. That's not what it says, right? But why is this, right? Why is this? So Rashi comes along and says, we have a verse. We have a verse in the book of Leviticus. The verse in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 13. What does it tell me? It says, you shall not cheat your fellow. You shall not rob. A worker's wage shall not remain with you overnight until morning. Now, you're going to say, what does that have to do with anything? So usually, the Talmud's going to analyze. It's going to look at every word or, majority part of the phrase over here, whatever the case is, and analyze and say, okay, what's going on over here? Now, some things, again, people jump up and down and say, come on, you're telling me it's a technicality, right? When the Torah tells me over here, it says, you shall not cheat your fellow. What does it mean, your fellow? It means someone of your people, right? Who you belong to. Who do you belong to? The Jewish people. So if you belong to the Jewish people, over here, who's it referred to? It refers to a Jew. 100% over here refers to a Jew. Now, technically speaking, over here, could a person cheat somebody else? Could they cheat a non-Jew in business? Could they misrepresent in theory? That's not what the halacha is. Obviously that's forbidden. But why would I think, in general, why just permissible just to do whatever you want to non-Jews? So I have a technical issue here. The technical issue is it says your fellow. Doesn't say everybody. If it wouldn't say everybody, then it means a Jew and a non-Jew. We wouldn't make any distinction, right? So either it would be forbidden. Either you could tell me, well, certainly if it mentions a Jew, it mentions your people. If it mentions your people, then it's coming to exclude who? A non-Jew. What if, let's say, and the rabbis in any case say you're not allowed to do this, right? From a Torah perspective, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. It's a technical issue, right? But someone's going to say, see, this is what it says. Even if that's what it says, you have to take it much further. Just because the Talmud says something doesn't mean that's what the law is. There could be a whole differences of opinion between, let's say, the rabbis and the Talmud. There could be differences of opinion. There could be differences of opinion among the early commentators, the later commentators. But the question is, bottom line, someone's going to say, wow, that's terrible. That's a horrible thing. But that's not how we hold. Practically speaking, you're not allowed to do it. So it would be forbidden anyway. But why would I think maybe it should be okay? So I'll give some other examples. The Torah tells me that a person, that a Jew has to do things that according to what the Torah says, has to be called Maisa Amcha. What is Maisa Amcha? It means the actions of your people. What does it mean, the actions of your people? In other words, if a Jew does what they're supposed to do, they keep Shabbos, they keep Torah, they keep whatever they need to keep, very good. If, let's say by Shabbos, we'll make it interesting. We'll say by Shabbos. What does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me if I don't keep Shabbos properly, what happens? So you're liable for a death penalty, even though we don't have a death penalty today, and very few people, if any, were really killed. Even at the time of the first temple or second temple, doesn't really matter. But you'd be liable for a death penalty. That's the severity. At the same time, what also would you be liable for? You'd be spiritually cut off. Now, if that means you're spiritually cut off, the Torah says when I keep Shabbos, right, it's one of the signs between God and the Jewish people. So when I keep Shabbos and I make Kiddush Friday night, right, I sanctify the day, I have to stand up. Why do I have to stand up? I say Genesis chapter 2, beginning of Genesis chapter 2, that God rested on the seventh day. Why do I have to stand up? It's like I'm giving testimony. When a person gives testimony, they go into a court, a rabbinic court, they have to stand up and give testimony. Right? So there's a whole discussion. What if they didn't stand up and they gave testimony? Is it okay? But in general, when a person gives testimony, they have to stand. Very good. So if a person doesn't make Kiddush, let's say a Jew doesn't make Kiddush, they don't give testimony. Didn't we just say the first paragraph we read when when we make Kiddush on Friday night is about Genesis chapter 2. Gee, what happened before Genesis chapter 2? Creation. If I don't stand up and give credibility and give testimony to creation, what happens? It means that I don't have anything to do with God. It's like I deny God. Oh, if I deny God over here, what's my status? Do I still have the status of a Jew? Don't I? I'm not doing what Jews are supposed to do. So now, technically speaking, if a Jew doesn't do what they're supposed to do, if they don't, by certain things, right? Shabbos being one of them. If a Jew doesn't do what they're supposed to do, what happens? 100% they're going to have the status of a non-Jew in different ways, right? Not across the board. Doesn't mean they can't repent. They can certainly repent, etc. But there's a technical issue. There's a technical issue over it. They can always grab it back, but there's a technical issue. Now, if there's a technical issue, then there are ramifications. Even if they grew up, no offense, if they grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, right? No offense, anyone who was a potato farmer grew up in Idaho. It means someone doesn't know anything about anything. If they don't know anything about anything, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not liable, right? They may be liable for things they've done by accident. It still may be called a rebellion against God. That's essentially what it is. But if they don't know anything, okay, they're still going to be liable. It's not, no free lunch. Ignorance, in this case, isn't bliss. But a person can say, well, I didn't know. Well, too bad, right? Who cares if you didn't know, right? The difference is going to be if it's something very egregious, right? There are technical issues. Let's say, I'll give an example. Give one example. I don't want to digress too much here, but I'll give one example. Let's say a Jew has a relationship, with someone of the opposite sex they're not allowed to be with, right? It's a forbidden relationship. Doesn't necessarily mean, if someone's married, right? And, you have a child, God forbid, out of wedlock or whatever the case is, it's a forbidden relationship, whatever that forbidden relationship is. Now, if there's a forbidden relationship and they have a child, what's the status of the child? That child is called a mamzer, right? Now, a mamzer, how do people translate it? Again, a bad translation. They call it a bastard child. It's a child that really never should have been allowed to come into the world. God allowed it for whatever reason, but it's a forbidden relationship. Now, there's a status over here. There's a stigma. When the Talmud says that there are different opinions over here. Forbidden relationship, a child is born. It has to be from a Jewish mother. There's no such thing as a mamzer, as this blemished child, we'll call it, from a non-Jew, if the mother's not Jewish, right? So we're talking about a case where the mother's Jewish. It's a forbidden relationship. What's the end result? The end result is, as the rabbis tell us, that child can only marry someone of the same union. In other words, someone came from the same union or convert. Now, people are going to jump up and down, yell and scream, and say, what? Convert's a second-class citizen? Why is it only a convert that you can fix it up? Right? That you can't fix up the person. Maybe there's a whole thing because that child, and then, they grow up, they get married. Let's say they marry someone of the same union, or they marry a convert. What's the status of that child? Also a mamzer. What's the status of that next child marry someone of a similar union? Same thing, right? For all future generations, except in one case. There's only one case. The case is if that person would marry a slave, right? Let's say that guy would marry a slave. There's one place, as my Rabbi told me once, many years ago, there's one place in the world you're allowed to have slaves legally according to international law. And I don't know if it's changed or not. Could be it's still the same. And that is in Saudi Arabia. Now, if that would be the case, that Jew could marry, that Jew could be with a non-Jewish slave, have a child. That child does not have the status of being a bastard child anymore, right? To being a mamzer anymore. That status is finished. But it can't help the person himself. Now, someone's going to say, the child didn't deserve that. Why in the world does the child have to go through that? What's the answer? Because there are ramifications. There are physical ramifications for what we do. There are spiritual ramifications for what we do. Physical ramifications, very easy. If a woman, God forbid, a woman's pregnant and she smokes crack and the child comes out deformed, is it the problem of is it the fault of the child? Not the fault of the child. Totally not the fault of the child. But is there an end result? There's an end result. Totally, there's an end result. There are ramifications. Now, you have to look at the whole picture, right? And this I see quite a bit because people quote things. I see people quote things all the time, and they take things 100%. 100% is taken out of context. And when it's taken out of context, right? When it's taken out of context, that at least, I would be very happy to let people at least admit it's been taken out of context. But we're getting to the same point. If it cherry picks, someone does that, that's not the case, right? Someone here brings up interesting case. Could the Messiah be a mamzer? Where does the Messiah come from, right? Ruth comes from Moab. Where does Moab come from? Moab comes from Lot and his daughters, right? Because when the first child got pregnant and gave birth, what did she call the child? Moab. What does Moab mean? Literally, Me'av, from my father, right? So obviously not so not so modest over here. So what happens? So who comes out of Moab? Is Ruth. Everyone agrees, right? She's the daughter of the king, granddaughter of the king, whatever the genealogy is. But everyone agrees she comes from Moab. And then 3 generations later, who comes out of Ruth? Is King David. Now, is King David a mamzer? No. He doesn't come from a forbidden union. It's a permissible union. Then the question is, why would it be? Why in the world would it be that, the future Jewish Messiah is going to come from such a strange relationship? Okay, that's the question, right? Not going to come from a mamzer, right? That's not the case. I want to make one other point, just what the Talmud says over here, and people will say, well, if a non-Jew is married to a Jew, right? Or let's say better, even not married, and the Jew is a woman, and the Jew has a child, right? And that Jew has a child. Now, there are different things, different answers that the Talmud gives of what the status of this child is. In the end, we hold that the child is Jewish, right? But the Talmud says that child's a mamzer, right? That's one answer. Another answer is the child is puzzle. What does puzzle mean? Puzzle means that it's blemished. It's totally blemished over here, right? It's forbidden, in different ways. Technically speaking, again, the child is Jewish, but there's something else going on, in spiritual terms. So people will say, and I heard someone say this, people will say, well, it doesn't matter. As long as the child's Jewish, that's all that matters. So who cares? Right? Who cares? You want to tell me it's blemish? You want to tell me this? There are ramifications. People have to understand there are ramifications. So if someone will say, I don't care what the ramifications are, that child is Jewish. Right? Now, technically, they're right. Technically, 100%, they are right. But that's not really the point. The point is there's something seriously going on, over here in spiritual terms. Right? 100% spiritual terms over here. Right? So if it's spiritual terms, you're going to say, well, it's spiritual kudish. You can call it what, my definition, you can call it whatever you want. Right? But obviously there's something deeper going on. So then the question would be, you're going to tell me a mamzer. So why is it by a convert? Why only by a convert over here? Why can a convert marry? So, in such a relationship, why is that not a problem? Aren't they Jewish? You're right, they are. There's only one issue, right? There's one issue. What's the issue? That a convert, we say when they convert, they're called like a newborn baby. Okay, very good, right? So it's like everything changes. It's like whatever they did before, it's like almost they're getting a free pass. Very good. But there are certain limitations. Certainly, and we've spoken about this before. There are certain limitations. Convert can't marry a Kohen, right? There are certain limitations. Why not? Why not? Because a Kohen has a certain pedigree. He has a certain pedigree. If he's got a certain pedigree, so there's certain people the Torah says he's allowed to marry. He's not allowed to marry. Now, someone who is not allowed to marry, right? Certainly the high priest. This person cannot have been with somebody, or even not a high priest. Let's say a Kohen in general cannot be with someone who has been with someone else, been in let's say a forbidden relationship. That could be a Jew also. Not just talking about a non-Jew. Could be a Jew also. Now, how many people today, have lived in Victorian England, right? At what age? We're not going to get gross here, and we're going to keep this, clean, But in the world that we live in, how many women can say before they're married they're still a virgin, right? How many? So you're going to say, oh, you discriminate against non-Jews. I'll say it against Jews. I'll say it against anybody. That's the world we live in. I went to university. I know what goes on, right? I lived in that world, part of that world, right? So you're going to say, but that's not fair. But that's not discrimination against a non-Jew who converts. You say the same thing about a Jew. We don't discriminate, right? If they've been part of a forbidden relationship, they can't be with a Kohen. And it comes out, I can't even tell you, many, many times. Many times this comes up. They say it's not fair and it's not this. But how many people live in Victorian England? We live in an upside down world where, all I have to say is, okay, which bathroom are you going to walk into when you go to a public bathroom? Gee, depends which gender. What do you think? It's a crazy, mixed up, messed up world, over here. So you want to tell me people are perfect? No, certainly not. Am I going to say non-Jews are more promiscuous, than Jews? I don't think secular Jews are going to be any different. They're going to fit in all the statistics, right? I don't think they'll be any different, right, so to speak. But people get caught up and they say, oh, it's not fair and it's discrimination. This has to do with being in a forbidden relationship and someone you're not allowed to be with. We're not saying it's only about non-Jews who convert. It's about Jews also. 100% it's about Jews also. Same situation, right? So that's one. So we gave one example. Give a second example, Baba Kama 37b. If a non-Jew's ox gores the ox of a Jew, he's liable. And he's got to pay, whereas if a Jew's ox gores a non-Jew's ox, he doesn't have to pay. Sounds pretty bad. So what's going on over here? So again, what is it? What's the give and take over here? So the Talmud itself gives an exemption. Right, assumes over here that the exemption is based on the verse, Exodus chapter 21, verse 35. It says about Shur Re'ehu, right, the ox of your friend, right, his fellow man's ox. Sound familiar? Like we said before, right? It says his fellow man's ox. Technicality. It's his fellow, not someone who's not his fellow. Who's not his fellow? A non-Jew, right? So he's only going to pay. If he gores the ox, of a non-Jew. Now goring, we don't, how many people live on farms and all that? You could say, well, let's say a Jew damages property of a non-Jew, right? Let's say, their car hits their car. They're going to have to pay? Oh yeah, they're going to have to pay, right? So maybe it's a technical issue over here, one possible explanation. Another answer is, now people are going to jump up and down about this also. Another answer the Talmud gives is why are Jews really, why should we be allowed to keep money of non-Jews? Why should that be? Why should they not be liable over here? Because the Talmud tells me what happens. The non-Jews have an obligation. Any non-Jew out there doesn't want to convert, which is fine. Any non-Jew and Noahide, or whatever you want to call them, right? They have to keep the Noahide laws. They have an obligation to keep the Noahide laws. Now, the 7 laws are an umbrella. There are about 60 laws, 65 laws, total. But these are laws that everybody understands. They're universal according to the Torah. Don't kill, don't steal, any of these things. They make sense according to the Torah. So what happened? Non-Jews stopped at some point observing the Noahide laws. Now, a number of the Noahide laws, if a non-Jew doesn't keep, they're liable for a death penalty. It's a pretty severe prohibition. So people say, if it's such a severe prohibition, why? Why is it so severe? Because these things are obvious. Person gets upstairs after 120 years, they can't make the claim and say, gee, I didn't know. How did I not know? How did I not know, that you weren't allowed to kill? So, that's what God's going to say. You didn't know? So no, euthanasia. Come on, that's different. That's 100% different over here because, Grandpa was dying anyway. He's losing his mind. He was in pain. So we just put him out of his own misery or out of our own misery. That's mercy. Well, we hold that's murder, right? So, and they'll say, so, God will say, well, I see over here, the law of the land, you have to pay taxes. So I said, I paid taxes, but, God said, well, you didn't pay full taxes over here. You hid things that were illegal to hide. Now that's different. Uncle Sam takes too much. He takes way too much. So I'm going to hide certain things. That's okay. Why is that okay? Why is stealing okay? So people justify what they do. Doesn't mean it's okay, right? 100% doesn't mean it's okay over here. So another answer is they didn't observe the Noahide laws, right? So if they don't observe the Noahide laws over here, there's a kanas, there's a fine, there's a punishment, over here. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean in the vernacular, right? What does that mean in the vernacular? So in the vernacular, it means that we're taking their money and we're making it ownerless, right? That's seemingly what the Talmud says, right? Now you're going to say, why should they be allowed to do that, right? What's going on that, is causing this whole thing? Now, one thing is that a non-Jew suspected, and people will probably jump up and down about this also, and that is they're suspected of intentionally inciting his animals to damage the animals of Jews. So he's penalized anytime, if he does it by accident, right? He's going to be penalized over here. And he's going to have to pay full damage if he damages a Jew's animal. So this would be an incentive for non-Jews, obviously, not inciting their animals, not causing damage, etc. But a Jew, see, there's a major difference. What's the major difference over here? A Jew, the Torah tells me many times, I have to be careful with property. That doesn't belong to me. I absolutely have to be careful. I have to treat someone's property better than, I would necessarily treat my own. I have to be extremely careful not to damage someone else's property. Right? Torah tells me many times. Right? In the book of Exodus, Parsha Mishpatim tells me, law after law about being careful with other people's property and damages. And, there are three, major tractates of Talmud, from that Torah portion, that go through all, so many, not just limited to these three, but other tractates as well that go, so much into detail, about the laws of damages and how careful a Jew has to be. So, my son, learning Talmud now at the age of 10, almost 11, what's the first thing they learn? What's the first chapter they learn in Talmud? Chapter 2 of Bava Metzia. What does chapter 2 of Bava Metzia talk about? Hashavas Aveda, returning lost objects, right? Knowing that the world is not ownerless, right? Knowing I have to be careful if I see something and it's got signs on it. I can't, we can't just say finders keepers. Maybe we'll say that, but, if it has signs on it, it's only got a name or the place or the amount or different things, I got an obligation to return it. I have to find who the owner is. It doesn't mean I can just take it. Doesn't mean I can just do anything what I want with it. But, kids are taught from a very young age, they have to be careful with other people's property. I don't know. I'll go on a limb here, right? I grew up in public school. I never had it reinforced over and over and over, telling me you got to be careful with, with other people. You got to be careful with their property. It could be, my memory, is a little bit foggy from, way back when. I don't remember hearing day in and day out, and hearing, mussar and ethics. You got to be so careful. And anytime you damage someone's property or whatever, it's a Torah prohibition in most cases. You got to be so careful. All these things. Okay. I understood you're playing ball. You're not going to play near someone's house and then it breaks a window. Okay. We do understand basic things, but is it emphasized over and over and over, that's what's going on? The Torah does that, time and time again. So again, is a non-Jew going to be extra careful that they're worried about damaging someone's property? So you tell me maybe it's on the books, maybe they're taught at some point, you got to be careful. You can't just damage property. You can't just do what you want, and all that. Then it could be, if they do something, they vandalize, they're going to be liable and different things. True. Right. That's very true. But the question is, how much is it satirized within society? So people say, well, we know what right and wrong is. Okay. That may be true, may not be true. But here, one possible explanation is the fact that for a non-Jew, they should be more careful. 100%, they should be more careful over here. Another explanation is because in the courts of non-Jews, what does it say in non-Jewish court, non-Jewish law over here? That they have to pay full value. Full value of the damage has to be paid by the owner of the damaging ox or whatever, however they damage over here. Now, technically speaking, a Jew's going to be exempt because over here, let's say, example, a loan that a non-Jew gives a Jew, right? Does the non-Jew, if let's say the non-Jew does not expect repayments, he doesn't expect repayment. So can he come back to the Jew and say, now I want it back? Right? If he doesn't, so a Jew generally would be permitted not to pay it back if the non-Jew doesn't expect to pay it back. Now, if the non-Jew says, I want the money back, you're obligated to pay me. Okay, he's obligated to pay. 100%, he's obligated to pay over here. So there, a person can say, well, Rabbi, you just gave me 3 answers, 2 answers, 3 answers, whatever. You're coming down to the same thing. I don't like any of them. I don't like, I don't like this aversion to where, these technicalities, these other issues. I don't like these answers. Okay, person doesn't have to like the answers. Again, there could be 150 answers, right? There are different things, but some of them I think would resonate, right? Non-Jews have to keep mitzvahs over here that everyone agrees that are universal, right? So if not, well, for many things they'll be liable for a death penalty. They'll be 100%. They'll be liable for the death penalty. But the rabbis go along over here and say, listen, you are absolutely ruining the world. What you're doing is you're not keeping by basic things that God wants all mankind, even Jews. We have to keep these laws also, right? They may apply differently to us than maybe it applies to non-Jews, right? In general, but we also have to keep it. We also have to keep these laws. So wouldn't it make sense to a certain extent that if they're ruining society, society cannot be sustained if everyone's stealing, technically, or they're causing damage. What happened to the Dor HaMabul, the generation of the flood? What was the final seal that God destroyed that generation? That generation got destroyed by stealing. Now you're going to say, come on, wasn't there the big 3 that every Jew, anytime, any place has to give up their life for, right? One of them is idolatry, murder, and immorality, right? If a Jew or a non-Jew, would put a gun to your head anytime, any place and say, I want you to bow down to this guy in a stick, right? A reference to JC or short little fat guy, Mr. Buddha himself. They probably won't call him that, but we'll make fun of idolatry anyway, right? And they'll say, bow down to fatso or die. So then you have an obligation to die. anytime, any place, that does not apply to a non-Jew. Again, it's a technical issue. Why necessarily wouldn't apply to a non-Jew, but that's not really the point. The point is, didn't the generation of the flood, weren't there all these terrible things going on? 100%. Right? Commentaries say all these terrible things were going on. But what was the final seal? What was the final seal? Stealing. Why? Why is, stealing's not something you have to give up your life for. 100% you don't have to give up your life for. No one says you have to give up your life. So why would that be more severe? Why would that be the final seal, so to speak? So what's the answer? Because a society cannot function. If everyone's busy stealing from everyone else, the society won't function. Society will destroy itself. Especially if somebody stole, let's say, somebody stole a minimal amount that they're not liable for. Right? And this happened in Sodom. You steal a little bit, right? Let's say you steal less than a penny. Or let's say, whatever, less than a penny. Less than a penny from someone. You're not liable. Technically, Torah says you're not liable. Okay. So what if someone else steals from that person less than that amount? And then someone else steals from that less than that amount. So what's going to happen? They're eventually going to take everything from that person. So that you can't have. That society will destroy itself. Right? Then people do this and do that. And if you let things go by, and non-Jews are not keeping what they're supposed to do, the world can't function. Totally can't function. Right? So there's punishment over here. This is punishment. That the fact that they have to be careful. They have to be careful what they do. So this will keep them in check in order that they're not going to damage. Not going to damage a Jew's property. But then someone's going to say, come on, if that's the case, how many non-Jews out there? How many non-Jews have gone against the Noahide laws and they don't even know what the Noahide laws are? They don't know what the Noahide laws are. Well, guess what? Even if they don't know what the Noahide laws are, aren't these things universal? God is not going to penalize somebody, and God is not going to say, come on, he's not going to penalize someone and say, well, since you didn't know this, or wasn't capable of you knowing this, why would I punish you? Right? That would not be logical. That wouldn't be fair. But, people have said, but the non-Jews, come on, how many non-Jews know what the Noahide laws are? Well, the Gemara says also, the Talmud says, you want to go in the right direction, God's going to help you. If you don't want to go in the right direction, God's not going to stop you. So therefore, what if I go according to what's universal, and I go in that path, very good. But someone is going to figure that out, or they should figure that out, because if they want the truth, and even if they transgress things, they may be liable for death penalty. They're allowed to repent, right? They're allowed to repent over here, so they can come back. 100%, they can come back. They won't be liable over here. But again, it's something where this is universal. God is not going to zap someone and say, see, you didn't keep this tiny minutia, tiny fraction, of something that you wouldn't have known about anywhere. There's no possible way you could have known. So if there's no possible way you could have known, come on, then why would God punish such a person? Never punish such a person. Never punish such a person. That wouldn't be fair. But if it's something that's logical, right? Don't steal. You should be careful with other people's property. Someone's going to say, who says I have to be careful? Well, the Torah tells me. Well, who says the Torah is true? Okay, that's another discussion, right? But if you're holding by things that are universal and everybody agrees that, these things are forbidden, you can't make such a claim. I mean, people can make whatever claims they want, but, you can't make such a claim. So the rabbis have a right over here. They absolutely have a right. They can say they are ruining society. And if they're ruining society, they're causing us problems. So there's payback. 100% there is payback. They'll say it's not fair, it's not this, they don't have the right. Again, let's look at the bigger picture. Right? You gotta look at the bigger picture. Most people, again, are not looking at the bigger picture over here, right? Totally not looking at the bigger picture. So if they, if they're not looking at the bigger picture, what's going to happen? So society will run amok. It's a good word, run amok here, right? Society totally, run amok. But again,
Yep.
what could someone claim? What could somebody claim? Someone could claim, but that's part of my DNA. My parents gave this to me. That's, who we are. That's what we do, or whatever. So what? So who cares? Who cares that, part of my DNA, part of my DNA is like, I could say I have an anger gene. I have a miser gene. I have all kinds of bad genes that are part of my disposition, whatever it is I did to myself. God gave it to me, and all these things. Could be, right? But God says, I don't care. I want you to work on it, right? I want you to, I want you to do things that are going against that. But a person can say, but you programmed me that way. So what's the person going to, what's God going to say? But I didn't tell you to do it. I didn't tell you to go, to go in that way. So, the rabbis have a certain power, which again is a much bigger discussion, which we've discussed before. And the Torah tells in the book of Deuteronomy that you have to listen to the Kohanim and the Levites in every generation. Those are the rabbis, and whatever they say, left is right, right is left. You have to listen to them. Whatever they tell you. Now, I'm not going to listen, and I'm going to do it. So again, you don't want to go according to their authority. I get it. Right? And people will say, well, they don't have the right. Well, do you believe in the Torah? You don't believe in the Torah. And that's the obvious question, right? That's the obvious question that we come back to, right? So, if people are doing things, and I guess we're going to end with this because we're not going to get further to other things, but, if society is not going to be able to function, and the rabbis understand that society is not going to be able to function, so there's a penalty. Now, non-Jews can say, I don't listen to the penalty, whatever, but that's going to cause major problems. And if society is going to eat itself up and not going to be allowed to function, that's a problem, right? That's a problem. But the issue is, as we said before, you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't, you can't. The rabbis can't do this. People can pick apart, every single answer and different questions that the Talmud is going to come up with. Right, and that Jewish law is going to come up with. But in any case, whatever a person's going to say, right, whatever a person's going to say over here, that is not the law, right? That's not the law. You're going to have to pay anyway. So even if a Jew gored someone else's, gored a non-Jew's ox, he's going to have to pay anyway. That's what the halacha is. The question is, okay, we're going to look and we're going to analyze why would a person be exempt. And a lot has to do with also, practically speaking, what in the world do we do, right? You have to take the whole thing and look in the bigger picture. And if you look in the bigger picture, you can also say, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, I don't like that. Okay, some things may resonate more, some things, may resonate less. Question is, do I have an obligation to keep it? What level is my obligation? Do I really have to, listen to the rabbis? That's a much bigger question. But once we understand, why I have to keep oral law, why I have to listen to the rabbis, and all these things, okay, then we have to understand, each case by itself. But for goodness sakes, you can't look at something and just look at one thing and say, or look at, one aspect and say, oh, this is what it is. And this is terrible. And then, okay, let's see what the context is. And then you could pick apart that. Say, I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't like the other thing. But there are a lot of other. I mean, I only hit a few here, right? But there are definitely a lot of other issues that I guess we'll have to pick up with this.
Sorry.
Next week.
That's fine. That's fine. Good job, by the way. Your timing is actually really good. Now, being that, now I know we have fun about me cutting you off, and your shows can't be as long as Rabbi Singer's, but to be fair, your show now is like the last show of the day. So,
right.
And the first show of your day, of course, because you're actually up quite early. But if you ever need to go longer, you certainly can. So.
Okay. Well, the problem's going to be I have another class in about 2 minutes. So,
no, you don't, because I called and
unless we did it a little bit earlier. But,
I called and canceled that, so you don't have to worry about that now.
That's good. So you can also cherry pick. That's beautiful.
I'm totally kidding.
You didn't listen to one word I just said for the last 59 minutes, but that's okay. I can take that sitting down. Not a problem. That's good.
That's funny. That's funny. Rabbi, thank you so much for your time. Guys, don't forget to subscribe, like, turn on the notifications for the YouTube channel. Otherwise, you won't get the notifications. And follow me on Facebook. Super important. That's where I put up a lot of my posts as well. So you guys have a great Shabbat. This is the last show of the week. We'll see you again, not this Sunday. And this is for Rabbi Singer for sure, because this is actually Shavuos is actually on Sunday, Monday. So probably this next Sunday and Monday, there are no shows. Tuesday, we'll be back online again for 2, 2, and 2, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So another 6 shows this week, but just not on Sunday and Monday. You guys have a great week. Rabbi, thank you again. You're awesome. Love you, man. And we'll see you on the other side. Take care, everybody. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד